Fascism is not alien to the United States. You could argue the fascist political culture in the United States evolved after the Civil War, first in the Reconstruction period, which is, Reconstruction ends in 1877, first fascist movements in Europe, 1919. So we're looking at 34 years before the Europeans who studied us.
Yeah.
Okay? So, and then it was like a cross-pollinization, transatlantic fascist culture that developed from that. So we inform the Europeans inform us. But we have to start, when we're talking about American fascism, in the colonial period, which I will not go into detail today. I did that in my last talk. I really want to concentrate post-Civil War. Now, just to reiterate what Paul said, we're not talking about semantics when we say we need to drop F-bombs. This is a particular, unique, fascism is style of political culture and government. Nothing else captures the qualitative change in government and the state's imposition of a national culture on its people, based on violence and all kinds of repressive institutions. Competitive authoritarianism, as Paul's written in his blog, has become sort of a popular, trendy way for liberals to talk about fascism. Because the neoliberal project cannot survive resistance to fascism, which is directly linked to a capitalist political economy. Liberals are afraid of the F word because their part in the establishment will suffer too through thoroughgoing resistance. And plus probably the lack of education to understand what fascism is when it's literally stomping its boot in your face. So the word fascism, we're not talking about semantics and just mere terminology. We're talking about a specialized concept that has a name. And if we don't name the beast, we don't know what we're fighting. This is not a liberal democracy. It's not a liberal democracy. It's not competitive authoritarianism. It's fascism. And there are two major fascist periods in American history. Well, three actually. We have Reconstruction, then the Jim Crow era, then the fascist birth of the second Ku Klux Klan, and then our era today. So actually four. You can group them in different ways, but we can see four periods where American fascism begins as a political culture in the Reconstruction South and has festered in full consolidation in the United States today under the Trump regime and the MAGA movement. Okay, just to go back a little bit. American fascism is impossible without the ideology of American exceptionalism. That we are God's gift to the world, that Americans, and I'll quote it here, are a special breed of human with a providential mission to remake the world in its own image. And the evidence for American exceptionalism is allegedly history. It's really a myth, but it disguises itself in history. We have this indispensable part to play in the salvation of the world. Okay? Jefferson said, Empire of Liberty, to describe the Republic as it was expanding west. He said, we'll be the first republic to elide the disintegration of an empire. We'll be the first republic to avoid disintegrating into an empire, having the character of Republican liberty collapse under the weight of corruption, decadence, authoritarianism, and so forth. Jefferson believed that our providential mission, we would elide that apocalyptic fate. So American exceptionalism is master race theory. And I'll give you an example from a great, we'll say fascist adjacent president named Ronald Reagan. And here's a quote from one of his debates in 1980. I've always remember the historical here, right? It's really a myth, but here's his history. I've always believed that this land was placed here between the two great oceans by some divine plan, that it was placed here to be found by a special kind of people. And when the next phrase, I skipped here, but he talks about, we came from all corners of the world and moved west across the continent. How can you come across from all corners of the world and move, right? He's talking about white immigration, white Protestant immigration. These people have special love for freedom as they build a republic on the foundation of white supremacy and slavery. And Native American genocide. We built a new breed of human, master race, called an American, a proud, independent, and most compassionate individual. Now, there is compassion in American history and culture. Let's not dismiss it wholesale. But to describe America's national mission as compassionate is, let's say, ahistorical and a moral abomination that simply takes people of color and vanishes them from the historical landscape. Just like they're trying to vanish brown people in this country today in a mass deportation regime that amounts to ethnic cleansing. Okay, so here's our compassionate people. Okay, here's a nice map of peace treaties that show by treaties how America expanded from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And doesn't it look nice and peaceful? A nice empire of liberty set up here through diplomacy, right? Compassionate. Compassionate, right? Okay, how many wars against Native Americans can you name in these separate peace treaty areas that created these spaces for the United States' dominion? Okay, I mean, you could start Pequot War, King Philip's War, King William's War. This is all New England and New York. Go south, Cherokee War, Powhatan Wars, Tuscarora Wars, Yamasee Wars, Seminole Wars, the Red Stick Creek Wars, the Choctaw Wars, Louisiana Purchase. We have the Cheyenne Wars, the Sioux Indian Wars. In the Texas country and the far west in the Mexican Cession Territory, Comanche Apache Wars. And in Oregon, the Flathead Wars and other Native American nations. Every single inch of this ground was based on genocidal expansion that aimed at two things, either extermination, assimilation through, three things, assimilation through cultural imposition, or, quote, reservations, which in concept are just giant concentration camps. I mean, what were they designed to do? To end Indian resistance by concentrating people, depriving them of their culture, their livelihoods, and making them vassals of the United States. Okay, so here's another important thing. Every inch of the ground, of American ground, that moves west below the 3630 parallel here, created by the Missouri Compromise, every single inch of ground gained here from the 17th century was based on destroying Indian nations to expand the plantation concept based on racial slavery. Okay, now, let's go from the bottom up. Native Americans, enslaved African Americans. Resist. All the time. I had in the previous talk a laundry list of Native American uprisings and African American enslaved revolts. What this does is it creates a reality that white supremacy is not always in control and can be overthrown. So not just white control, but the idea of what white civilization is, which whites for a long time defined as Protestantism, now more broadly as Christianity. But the golden rule, the organizing principle of Christianity, does not exist in this worldview in terms of social interactions with non-whites. The golden rule is circumscribed racially around white people. And to preserve white Christianity, white Christian dominionism is the project of white Christian national dominionism, control, the ability to create institutions that ensure that whites are always running the show. That history of resistance creates, as I said, this real fear of a violent uprising. But that real fear exists even when there is no uprising. Hofstadter called this kind of conspiratorial worldview the paranoid style, but he doesn't go into any of this. The most paranoid of the paranoid style in American political culture is the fear of white genocide, which has another name. Well, there's two names. This is what white nationalists call this fear. White genocide or the Great Replacement theory. Okay, the Great Replacement theory. And what white genocide or the Great Replacement theory puts at the center is that white Christian native-born lives can be extinguished and white Christian civilization itself will be destroyed. So it's this apocalyptic, conspiratorial theory that is jealously guarding an always tentative white supremacist regime that is never fully in control. And so let's just flash forward something I wanted to mention at the end of the talk. Think of the Black Lives Matter movement and the impact that had on the MAGA movement. They burned down the cities of the country. Right? They're in control. The police can't arrest anyone anymore. Let's buy more guns. Let's hold a Nuremberg-like rally to back the blue. Comply. Do not exercise your civil rights. Comply. And who needs to comply? Either African Americans or anyone who objects to the white Christian nationalist regime. So when we talk about the Great Replacement theory, we're talking about fear of real revolts that have happened, but also the prospect of revolt, and not just revolt today. Any movement that asserts the civil rights and political power of non-white Christians, either native-born or foreign-born, and even whites who can be Christian, who don't get along with the Christian nationalist program. They become, to quote Donald Trump, enemies of the people. And then a phrase from a Georgia senator in 1790 has always stuck with me. There was a petition to abolish slavery presented to Congress in 1790. And this Georgia senator stood up and said, "We the people does not mean them." Now, what's one of the most typical, pervasive MAGA sort of like icons on the back of a car, for example, a bumper sticker? We the people. That's what they're saying. We are the real Americans. And we're being invaded by immigrants who are very often not white. We are being destroyed by, quote, cancel culture, wokeism, secular culture, challenges to patriarchal authority, to traditional concepts of gender. Everything is being destroyed by enemies from within and without. So, going back to our map here, what we need to understand is that the Great Replacement theory is born before the Civil War, but after the Civil War, with the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the revolution of congressional Reconstruction, we have institutionalized threats to white supremacy. You follow? It's in the Constitution now. So the threat has been institutionalized. And when we look at the violence of Reconstruction, we'll understand why. So here's just a 19th century print that brings together the two, quote, the racialized savage enemies, Native Americans and African Americans. This is from the Seminole War in Florida, which the U.S. Army fought in maybe 4 different phases from around 1810 to 1858. So, we'll only add one more to the cast of enemies of the people, immigrants. The first wave of non-Protestant immigration in the mid-1840s, the Irish and the Germans, challenged the Protestant native-born identity of America. This was the first, quote, invasion. Right? You hear that word today about immigration. It's an invasion. The Irish were a foreign horde of savages seeking to impose Rome rule on America. They couldn't handle the obligations of democracy. They were criminals, they were drunks, and they were an unsettling and toxic presence in America. And here you can see how the Irish were racialized. Wow. And here's the pun, okay? This Irishman looking ridiculous, sitting on a wash tub with a pot in his head for a crown. The king of Ashanti, Irish shanty. Ashanti is a West African ethnicity that was very well known to slave owners and white people in the 19th century. So the racialization of the Irish as non-white, more akin to the worst racialized group in America, African Americans, and they're on the same level of, same threat level to what America should be, which is a nation built by white people, for white people, to be run by white people. If you just look at the rhetoric of the 1868 presidential election that pitted Andrew Johnson against Ulysses S. Grant, the Democratic Party, that is their platform. Okay? It's not softened. The rhetoric is that direct. Okay. Okay, so let's get into Reconstruction. So the desolate South after the Civil War. It is a conquered territory. The economy is in ruins. The ecology, the landscape is in ruins. I think 1 out of every 4 soldiers who fought for the Confederacy dies. And the entire basis of the Southern economy, the slave plantation complex, is gone. It's been obliterated. Slaves are free. They can't be mastered in the old sense. So the white Christian nationalist identity that was especially rabid in the South is facing a cultural crisis and a crisis of power. So how is it going to be resolved? How can we, in true prototypical fascist fashion, culturally regenerate white Christian power in the South? How can that cultural regeneration of the defeated South be avenged and white Christian civilization and white Christians be put into power again? Now, there are various ways that this happens over Reconstruction. There's all kind of legislative finagling with voting rights that African Americans have achieved, stealing ballot boxes, intimidating people at the polls, campaign rhetoric, and so forth. But a key to a fascist movement is absolute irrationality to achieve this lofty, apocalyptic, regenerative goal. So in that irrationality, that creates a space for prolific violence. And not just violence, atrocity, literally overkill, mutilation, mass murder, pogroms, burning buildings to the ground, mutilation, torture. So how does that happen in the Reconstruction South? Well, it's really the remobilization of the Confederate Army into paramilitary groups that are known by various names. The Ku Klux Klan is the one everyone knows. But in Louisiana, which was the real epicenter of Reconstruction strife, they're called the Knights of the White Camellia. Each group is founded by an ex-Confederate general. Each group actually has chapters that are reconstituted Confederate companies and members of the same regiment and so forth. So what is the goal? The goal is to destroy the assertion of African American civil rights as prescribed in the 14th Amendment, to reinstate slavery by another name, to keep blacks from becoming a violent threat, and to safeguard the purity of white Christian civilization that is, the icon for it is white women. So the patriarchal project of Reconstruction in the South becomes a movement defined in essence by protecting the, quote, innocence and virtue and moral culture of the white Christian South. Every Reconstruction atrocity, every lynching, every pogrom, every attempted coup begins with the rumor that a white woman has been raped or might be raped. And so that is a very visceral, effective mobilization technique. Sound familiar? Well, undocumented migrants who commit terrible crimes, which are committed by native-born Americans all the time, they're singled out for their violence against white women. I think there's even a law named after a white woman who was killed. Maybe it's in Iowa, I can't remember. Exactly. So you guys follow me? Okay. So here are several examples of Reconstruction atrocities undertaken by paramilitary groups in the name of white supremacy and the restoration of white Christian culture. It's a battle, in their view, turned around from our battle today. In their view, the restoration of white supremacy is the battle against inhumanity. Right? So affecting white supremacy will save white people from the barbaric savagery of non-white Christians. So here are some examples of this. Memphis, 1866, the Memphis police force, which is filled with Confederate veterans. The Civil Rights Bill of 1866 was just passed. The reaction to that, rumor of a rape, assertion of black political rights. We have the Memphis police force going into a black neighborhood in Memphis called the Bend and massacring hundreds. No one knows the exact totals of these pogroms. But 200 to 300 at least, mass graves, people thrown in the river. All the lost are not accounted for. Several months later in New Orleans, after the 14th Amendment is passed in Congress and has gone out for ratification, which will occur in 1868. In New Orleans, African Americans who dominate the Republican Party in the South at this time, the pro-union party, gather in the state capital of New Orleans to draft the new Constitution, enfranchising at the state level the rights that African Americans have received at the federal level. What happens is General Harry Hayes, who was the highest ranking Confederate officer from Louisiana, remobilizes his units. It's called Hayes's Brigade. And what they do when the black delegates are meeting is they surround the State House and begin killing people outside it. They break into the State House. They're repulsed several times. But ultimately, they gain entrance and they kill everyone in there. And then those escaping are chased down the streets and alleys of New Orleans and butchered. And then any black person walking on the street becomes a target. All this done in the name, proudly, with no internal contradictions, by white Christians. Okay, the Red River Valley in Louisiana, that's where all the sugar plantations were. I listed seven pogroms there. Jim Crow is ushered in. Jim Crow is ushered in by the defeat of Reconstruction. So we have Southern ex-Confederates and the next generation coming into power where white supremacy has been reinstitutionalized. But remember, white supremacy is never secure. It can be empowered, it can be commanding, it can be dominant, but it's always, at least the perception is, under threat. The great replacement can happen. And so we have to keep the boot on the neck. So what does that involve in the Jim Crow South? An epidemic of lynchings. This is poor Henry Smith. He had mental health issues. He was accused of, so he's a pariah in his community. He was accused of raping and killing a young white girl named Myrtle Vance. So the authorities cooperate. They let a mob take him out of jail. He's held captive for a couple days. So the big rally, celebration, the spectacle of carnage and torture of an African American to resolve the tensions in the white psyche here, right? Visiting, like projecting all of this violence, all of this fear on one person through overkill. And not just through overkill, by organizing trains, advertising in newspapers, announcements in church. And so we've got crowds of, thousands of people attending lynchings. They even built a gallows for this one. And Henry was slowly burned to death, shot and mutilated. And people came up and mutilated his body and took parts of it home as souvenirs. Postcards were made. And this was typical. This is not just the worst example I can pick. This was standing. Okay, lynchings, coups where black power remained, particularly in Wilmington, North Carolina. Reconstruction had lasted. There was a fusion party where working class whites and blacks came together against the domination of the Democrat Bourbons, who were kind of like planters and industrialists and high financiers. So we had working class, some interracial working class solidarity, which is especially scary. But we also had an integrated city, and we had many black people in positions of power, including in the police and on the city council. Well, a black newspaper editor in Wilmington wrote an article against lynching. Whites used this as an excuse to say that blacks were promoting the rape of white women. Organized a new paramilitary group called the Red Shirts. Ran guns in, as New Orleans did in 1866. They brought guns in from the north. They armed themselves to the teeth. They organized the paramilitary units. They first destroyed the newspaper editor's office and then fanned out across the city to kill every black they see. This again is organized by a Confederate general, elderly person, who said that he would choke the Cape Fear River with black bodies before he would stand another second of, quote, Negro rule. Okay, so let's go to pogroms. East St. Louis, 1917. This one is really related to labor conflict and the increasing division of the labor movement into really an apartheid labor movement. So white workers organize against black labor competition. Then there's also in this one the language of we need to be tough on crime kind of stuff, right? Pete Hegseth would call it maximum lethality, right? Back to blue. So what ends up happening is white workers go through East St. Louis, which was majority black, and kill dozens into the hundreds, and thousands flee. They leave. Well, the national organization of this Confederate and neo-Confederate white nationalist politics consolidates with the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan. They're the first, I think, era that we can confirm fully as a fascist political culture. It does not create a fascist state, but it creates a political culture in the 1920s to build the foundation upon which MAGA has reached its ascent. This has staying power. So how does the Second Klan reincarnate? The Klan is a modern organization. It is organized as a corporation. It has a mark. In fact, it's founded by two executives in the public relations industry, which is a new form of business. It has a sales force that works on commission. It has several newspapers. It has a radio station. And it has, unlike the first Klan, which was a southern regional organization, the Second Klan is a national organization with chapters in every state, 6 million members by 1923, and even a women's Klan formed by white southern women who were sick of taking orders from white southern men in the quest for white supremacist regeneration. A novel called The Klansman in the late 19th century inspired G.W. Griffith, one of the great pioneers of cinematography, to adapt it to film, and he called this movie Birth of a Nation. And here we see, in film form, in one of the masterpieces of cinema, really, the reunification of North and South after the Civil War on the foundation of white supremacy. So how can we tell this from the movie? Well, the heroes of the Civil War in this movie are the Ku Klux Klan, who simultaneously are portrayed as willingly coming back into the Union, carrying Union flags. There were no Union flags or American flags being brandished in the South at this time. They were burning them still. Vicksburg, Mississippi didn't celebrate the 4th of July again until 1964. Okay? But the heroes of the movie are the Klan, because what the Klan does in the defeated South is reunite or rebuild civilization on the basis of white supremacy and a movement towards reconciliation with the North, who also is portrayed in the movie as being rescued by the advance of this violent but virtuous group, kind of like Christian soldiers. Okay? Now look at the iconography. Right? Cross, the burning cross. These aren't random choices. I mean, the burning cross is a Christian terrorist symbol. Okay. So the Klan reaches its apex membership in the 1920s. We talked about its modern organization, and here's something fascinating about fascism. Fascism combines modern technology for mobilization with these sort of primitive blood and soil ideologies. Keep going.
I think we should probably wrap up in a couple minutes this part, but then I think we should ask you some questions in just case you go extemporaneously on connecting it up with the present.
Okay, yeah, just a couple more things about this Klan. Yeah. I just want to make one or two comments about the present, then we'll go. Okay, so here I just wanted to make sure we understand that the Klan is not just white men. It is patriarchal, but with white women using that space that the Klan creates for civic engagement to advance their interests as white women, who they believe they have a special role in reproducing the white supremacist Christian culture over time. It's a pretty eerie image, isn't it? Yeah. I found it at Emory University's Ku Klux Klan collection. This photograph was found in the bottom of a trunk in a West Virginia yard sale. Wow. Yeah. Klan culture. The Klan at this time does not command the state. It's nonpartisan. The Democrats and Republicans are both elected with Klan support. But what Felix Harcourt argues in this wonderful book I urge all of you to read is that while the Klan did not command political authority and take over the state, it leaves this culture in the air that becomes the substance of American conservatism. Terroristic symbol. Here's what the Klan does in the 1920s. It holds fairs. It organizes baseball leagues, circuses, church picnics, movie screenings. And it commits pogroms in Chicago, Tulsa, Elaine, Arkansas, Tulsa again. I think this might be Rosewood right here. Mm-hmm. So, and Houston as well. These are just a couple examples.
East St. Louis.
East St. Louis, yeah. Pogroms that kill at each point dozens or hundreds of people and force thousands to flee. So this was a way of racial cleansing through paramilitary organization. This is an uprising of the Klan in Western PA against Irish Catholics. Okay, so what happens? Let's look at Klan culture real quick. Civil rights movement. What's that going to spark? Fear of great replacement, white genocide. What forms in its wake? The white citizens' councils, then the conservative citizens' councils. The Klan is reborn, and in 1964, after the Civil Rights Act is signed by the Democrats, that is it for the solid Democratic South. We have a complete party realignment. And thus, the capacity for a MAGA movement to take over that party. Then we have militia explosions after Vietnam that are mostly anti-communist in nature, but it's a feature of like an alien ideology coming in to replace our great American Christian civilization. And it will destroy civilization by destroying property, most importantly, and also by making everything equal. You can't have that in a white supremacist society. Kathleen Belew's book on this is a wonderful one. It's called Bring the War Home. Everyone should read that. Clinton, Obama elected, we see surges in paramilitary organization. And then with Obama's election in particular, we see the birther movement and the rise of the Tea Party. No black man can truly be an American president because he's not really an American, so he must have been born somewhere else. Right? Look at the statistics around gun sales following Obama's election. Yeah. Eye-popping. Also, during this entire time, the late 60s and forward, the urban insurrections, along with the civil rights movement, are going to be the impetus for two things, two complementary things: the war on drugs and mass incarceration. And even after the voting rights of 1965, as early as the late 60s, Republicans are starting to organize poll watching and voter rights identification and accusations of rigged elections and so forth. Okay. All right, so I'll just stop with this one. We know the conspiratorial, paranoid style of American fascism is part of this whole spark for cultural regeneration. So how does the MAGA movement weaponize this conspiratorial program? Well, first of all, the immigrant, quote, invasion. Secular culture overtaking traditional Christian culture, and then the rigged election. Stolen by not real Americans, who are always going to be black and brown, right? So stop the steal. The elections were stolen in urban areas with black poll workers and by brown people, usually Latin Americans, who were voting illegally. And also in the context of the Black Lives Matter summer of 2020. So the regeneration, make America great again, that's what that is. It is a fascist slogan. America first is a fascist slogan. Guess who used America first? First.
Klan.
The second Klan. So if you put a Klan speech up from the 1920s to a Trump speech in his reign of error and terror, you will see little difference. In fact, reading the White League's rhetoric in the Reconstruction South, there's not much difference. The only thing missing are immigrants. So we see a neo-Confederate vision driving the MAGA fascist movement, integrated with the national, quote, problem of mass immigration. So all these vectors are coming together. And what we're facing now is the fascist consolidation of the three branches of the federal government, multiple state governments, big swaths of the church, the media, and I think we'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy.